You're on That's Helpful with me, Ed Stott, and I am very excited for this episode. Before I got pregnant, I honestly could not have taken less of an interest in pregnancy, birth, or babies. And for the first 2/3 of my pregnancy, my attitude remained much the same until I read a book. And that book sparked an obsession and sent me deep down the rabbit hole. If you've had a conversation with me since, I will have bored you about it. And I'm now utterly obsessed with the science and magic of birth. The book I read was about hypnobirthing. If you're like me before I read the book and you think that means I'll have to invite a man with a pendulum and a shiny black cape to my birth, you couldn't be more wrong. Learning about hypnobirthing and reimagining the possibilities for birth has left me feeling empowered and, dare I say it, excited for this huge life event. If you told me that I would be feeling that way 6 months ago, I'd go, you're lying. So if you have a pregnant person in your life, please send them this conversation. They are going to be eternally grateful to you. The woman responsible for my new obsession is Siobhan Miller. She's the founder of the Positive Birth Company and the author of Hypnobirthing, Practical Ways to Make Your Birth Better. Siobhan, how did you come across hypnobirthing yourself?
In a very similar way to yourself, I was pregnant. It was actually with my second son. So the first time I hadn't heard about hypnobirthing, that was quite a while ago because my eldest is 17. So I hadn't heard of it back then. But with my second son, I was really terrified about birth, especially because I'd had my first experience and I found that quite frightening. So I think second time round, I was feeling even more frightened. Yeah. And I heard about hypnobirthing, people recommended it, and I had no idea what to expect. But everybody that spoke about it spoke as you're speaking now, like they raved about it. So I was like, what is this witchcraft that people speak of? So I signed up to a hypnobirthing class, and literally on our way there, my partner said, I hope they're not going to make us do anything weird. We really didn't know what to expect. Like, are they going to hypnotize us? Like, are we going to be clucking like a chicken? Like, what is this? We literally had no idea what to expect. And then we went to the classes and straight away, you cover the science of hypnobirthing, how your body works. And it's just light bulb moment after light bulb moment. And you're like, why did I not know this? Why were we not taught this at school? And it just changed everything. I felt so confident in my pregnancy, like you're feeling now. I remember thinking, even if my birth doesn't go well, I've really benefited from this because I've been able to enjoy my pregnancy. And instead of feeling terrified, I feel really excited to meet my baby. So I felt the benefits immediately. I went on to have a home birth with my son, and it was just the most magical and empowering moment of my entire life. And instead of feeling terrified, I felt, confident and invincible. And after he was born, even though it wasn't a perfect, whatever that is, in inverted commas birth, I did have to go to the hospital after he was born because of blood loss. But I felt like I have done this, I can do anything. I just felt the complete polar opposite to after my first son was born. And then I just became evangelical about it. And I was like, everyone should know this. And so that's why I set out to train as a hypnobirthing instructor. I started teaching couples kind of face to face. And I thought there's got to be a better way to get this out there. It needs to be accessible. Everybody should have access to this. And so I wrote the book. That was the first thing I did. And then I created an online course called the Hypnobirthing Pack. And then it just really took off. That's really how it began.
It's pretty amazing. And when you start to learn about it, it's like, oh yeah, of course. Like none of this is particularly, well, none of this should be particularly radical. Yeah. But it seems to be because we have this image of women giving birth, which is women lay on their backs, maybe with their feet in stirrups, screaming in agony, potentially shouting at the person that got them in this place. What we have that image, but that couldn't be further from the truth of what's possible for birth, right?
Absolutely. If you go back historically, before hot birth became very medicalized, the things that we talk about in hypnobirthing, for example, positions to give birth in, being in an upright position, having gravity on your side, doesn't mean you have to be standing straight upright. You could be squatting, kneeling, on all fours. But having gravity on your side immediately helps make birth easier. And women and birthing people would have used those positions instinctively. It's only really since birth became more medicalised and people tend to give birth in hospitals and the hospital room is set up around a bed, that people are then kind of on a bed and in that kind of reclined position. And actually, from a physiological point of view, that's one of the worst positions to be in, because
it makes your pelvis 30% more smaller, right?
It reduces your pelvis's capacity to open, and it means your coccyx can't, open, which is what it will actually do. It's designed to move. And you have to push your baby uphill. So it makes it a lot more difficult. You're more likely to need intervention and assistance, and you're more likely to cause injury to yourself. And when you hear about these things, you're like, well, of course, that makes complete sense. I always use the analogy, would I do a poo like this? If you were going to go and squat and do a poo in the wild, you would never lie on your back, right? You would squat. And I just think that is a kind of instinctive thing. Or even toddlers, when they start to go for poos, they don't lie down on their back to go for a poo. They stand or squat, because that's the most effective way to allow your body to open and expel something. And there are so many similarities between doing a poo and giving birth. But I always think, would I do a poo like this? No. So
unless you're feeling very, very fancy, I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's obviously it's an incredible toolkit for birth that kind of changes what we have been told and what we think of about birth. But if you are telling people about what you do and kind of explaining hypnobirthing really quickly, because sometimes I have told people, I'm going to the birth center. And for anybody who's not like pregnant or this deep into it as me, that's like a mixture between hospital and home birth. It's half medicalized, half not. Like it's a combination of the two. But really the goal is to give birth as naturally as possible with no epidural. And so when I tell people that I'm going to the birth center and that I plan on doing hypnobirthing, already there are a few raised eyebrows. So I can't imagine what you come across, Siobhan. But how do you explain hypnobirthing to people who've never heard of it?
Yeah, I mean, I do get raised eyebrows. My own mum still asks me when I'm going to get a proper job, and I'm like, "This is my proper job, mum. This is me now." She's like, "When are you going to use your degree?" And I'm like, "No, this is my career now. This is who I am."
She'll never stop. Never stop.
Yeah. Obviously, a lot of people think you're going to get hypnotized. You like stage hypnosis, or people have thought if it's something to do with hypnobirthing. Like, no hippos involved. The name actually kind of derives from hypnotherapy, and it's very much about the connection between the mind and body. But when I try to kind of sum it up in a nutshell, I say that it's a fully comprehensive antenatal education. It's an approach to birth that is grounded in science, and it will teach you about the physiology of birth and equip you with tools that you can use, practical tools for birth, but also for life, their life skills, mindfulness techniques, breath work, a decision-making framework. And although a lot of people who come to hypnobirthing want to have a natural birth like you've described, you can use hypnobirthing in all birth scenarios, all birth places. There are the things that you will learn, the tools that will help to downregulate your nervous system. That means keep your heart rate steady, keep you feeling calm. That's great for all birth scenarios, whether you're at home, in a birth centre or at theatre. You want to be able to be calm and in control and be able to make decisions. Also empowering people to feel like they have all of the knowledge they need and the kind of the framework to ask the right questions so they can make informed choices. That's a really kind of core part of hypnobirthing, that actually you don't just kind of step into the hospital, relinquish your control over yourself and just kind of get processed through the system and spat out the other side. Actually, This is your birth. It's your body. It's your baby. These are your choices, and helping people to feel confident in navigating their birth experience and making the choices that are right for them. And, we're all different. So what our dream birth will look like will vary from person to person. So hypnobirthing isn't prescriptive. It's not kind of trying to push people down one pathway, but actually encourage people to choose the right pathway for themselves. And as we know, so often there are so many kind of variables in birth. Mm-hmm. So always encouraging people to remain open-minded. You know, you kind of prepare for the birth you want, but you also know what you would do in these other scenarios, which I think can be really helpful because, like I said, so often things will change when you're in labour.
Oh, yeah. And so many of these tools have kind of changed my perspective on how I approach things for life. Like there's incredible toolkits for making decisions when you're under pressure, which we'll talk about a bit later on. But also like the breathing techniques to stay calm and to understand why that's important and the impact that that has on your body. It's absolutely incredible. And what does the science say about the results of hypnobirthing? And you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but how does your experience differ between the first birth that you had with no hypnobirthing and the births that you've had afterwards with this knowledge?
Yeah, so on a personal basis, it was just life-changing. How my birth happened the first time round was also quite different because I was induced with my first baby. So I was in a hospital from the kind of get-go. I was in the hospital for 3 days, trying all different kind of methods to help me to dilate. I was taken to theatre for a C-section at the end of my labour, but I was fully dilated. So with the help of forceps, he was born in theatre. I'd had kind of every drug going, every intervention going. I hadn't slept or eaten, and I was very young. I was 21, and I just felt completely out of control, out of my depth, scared. I had no kind of tools to help me manage that and no knowledge. I was just so naive. When I was offered an induction, I thought that just meant my baby's going to come quicker. So I was like, great. You know, I didn't know there was any risks associated with induction or that I should be making that decision myself as to whether that would be the right course of action. Mm-hmm. So there's so much I would do differently if I was able to go back and have that birth again. So it wasn't, what I'm trying to say is it wasn't the fact that I was induced that made it, a scary experience. It was the fact that I had no knowledge and no tools. Whereas with my second baby, completely different story. I felt really informed. I had my toolkit. I had my birth partner who was also on side, and I planned this lovely home birth. And I felt at all points, even afterwards when I had to go in the ambulance to the hospital, I just felt calm, in control, felt really capable. I felt informed. I just felt great. And then I would say to people afterwards, I wish I could give birth every day. And they look at me like I'm crazy. But so many of those people have come back to me afterwards and been like, I get it now. Yeah. It was like the best day of my life. I want to do it again. So I'm not the only mad one. So it really changed my experience. But from a kind of evidence point of view, there is different studies for different elements of the hypnobirthing course. So, for example, there's lots of evidence around the different things you can do to reduce your risk of tearing. So being in an upright position, having a slow, controlled birth of the baby, so using your breath rather than forcibly pushing, just a few examples. And all of that is stuff we teach in hypnobirthing. So there is evidence that those things work. There is evidence around choosing your birthplace choice. So if you are somebody who's having a kind of uncomplicated pregnancy, if you're a second-time mum especially, and you've had an uncomplicated birth the first time round, statistically, home birth is the safest place to give birth, because being in a hospital setting to be safe actually means you're more at risk of having unnecessary intervention, which elevates different risk factors. So certainly being informed, looking at the studies is really important. And that's something that we teach in hypnobirthing. But to my knowledge, there isn't a study yet, like a large scale study, to show if you do this entire hypnobirthing course, is it going to improve your outcome? And can we prove that? Because I guess nobody's funded that kind of study. But if you break down the course into individual bits, there are lots of evidence and supporting studies for those bits.
Yeah, and it's not surprising to me that we don't have the evidence to support this, because the main thing that hypnobirthing relies on is all the tools that you have in your body. There's no fancy equipment, there's no drugs, there's no prescriptions, it's just all the tools that you easily have at hand and anybody can use, right?
Exactly, and especially in in a country where healthcare is like privatized, it wouldn't be in the interest of the kind of business model to promote hypnobirthing, because people might be more quick to decline intervention or decline drugs and give birth at home. So it's not going to be in everybody's interest.
No, not at all.
Definitely for the benefit of the person giving birth.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I even started considering birth, at the very beginning of my pregnancy, I was kind of of the opinion, oh no, I'm going to have epidural. If I can have a C-section, what a win. If I just get me into hospital and get this out of me in the most medicalized way possible. And then I started reading your book and I was like, oh, of course, like these things come at a cost, and the cost is quite big. And I think so many of us don't really realize, or whether that's like through ignorance and trying to avoid experiencing birth in its fullness. I don't know, or whether we've been sold by society that we need to overcomplicate this and we need it medicalized. But I do think lots of people are of that opinion that more medical interventions actually makes it easier, when actually the opposite it's scientifically evidence-based shows is true.
Yeah, I think there's so much misinformation around, and the media, I think, has a lot to answer for. I think you've heard the phrase "too posh to push." For as if a C-section was the easy way out, when that's not the reality at all. And you see videos showing, how many layers that you have to cut through when having a cesarean birth. Not to put anybody off if that's the choice they're making, but to understand it is a significant surgery that you're having. So I hate that phrase "too posh to push," because that's not the easy way out, is what I'm saying, that a cesarean birth is intense in a different way. So you kind of have to, do your research and pick the method that's right for you at the time. And it may well change during the kind of journey as you labour.
Yeah, absolutely. So as this conversation is kind of an introduction to hypnobirthing, if people haven't heard about it before, let's talk through some of the techniques that people might learn about in the book or your courses, or if they go away and explore this themselves. One of the things that is really important in hypnobirthing is the language that we use around hypnobirthing. What kind of language should we be using, and why is this important when it comes to hypnobirthing?
So I would never want to be prescriptive and say this is the language you should be using. But I do make suggestions and certainly draw people's attention to the impact that language can have on you. So I think in the book there are a few different examples about how you can phrase questions and they can have a really strong impact on somebody. Like, for example, do you have a job, or are you just a stay-at-home mum? The word just slipping in there completely makes it seem like that's an inferior position. And there is just so many things like that. And if you talk about, getting through labour, you immediately think because it's something horrible that you've got to kind of get through. And a lot of the language around labour and birth is kind of along that same, in that same tone, that it's something horrible that you've got to kind of get through. We don't talk about it in the way that I think honours what it really is, which is a kind of transitional journey, period, pathway to something hugely positive, which is meeting your baby. And, most people have either planned that baby, they've been growing that baby for a long time. This is the kind of lottery winning moment where you get to meet your baby. And so labour is that kind of pathway to that moment. So I feel like we should be using really positive language about how wonderful it is. And, as it gets more intense and as, your surges, and I talk about surges rather than contractions, getting stronger and more intense, that's good, right? Because it means that you're getting closer to meeting your baby. So if people talk about contractions, it makes you think of something kind of getting squashed, contracting. It's quite a harsh sounding word. Exactly. And it's kind of, it sounds scary, But also, I don't think it really accurately represents what the actual sensation feels like, because if you speak to anyone that's experienced labour, they'll tell you you can feel each kind of contraction or surge come on. It builds to a momentum where it's really intense and then it releases. So if you were to draw it, it kind of comes like a wave. So calling it a surge or a wave is not just more accurate for what it feels like, but also it sounds nicer.
Yeah,
I think so anyway. And you can talk about how powerful or intense your surges are with your partner, for example, or the medical professionals with you. You know, you can say my surges are getting more intense or my surges are getting more frequent. But if someone's asking you how painful are your contractions and you're reporting that your contractions are getting more painful and they're getting worse, it feels like things are getting worse, and that's scary. Like, how much worse is it going to get until I meet my baby? Actually, if they're getting stronger and more powerful, you're kind of putting yourself on that more positive mindset that they're getting stronger. That's really great. Strength is generally seen as a positive attribute. So it's just little things like that, you know, to be mindful of. And simple things like for birth partners, instead of asking the person who's in labour, you know, like, are you in pain? You know, and using those words that make the person think of pain. Am I in pain? And now I'm searching for pain. But you could say, you know, what can I do to make you more comfortable? You know, is there anything I can do to make you more comfortable? And then your brain is looking for comfort. It's just kind of changing and tweaking those words slightly can have a really profound effect on how you're feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does make a massive difference. We had the incredible journalist David Robson on. He's in the UK too. He's written a book about the expectation effect, and the fact that this is a real scientific phenomenon, that your expectation changes outcomes in the world, but also physically within your body. One of the examples he gives is when a controlled group of cleaners were told that their work actually constituted a serious hard workout and they were doing enough physical activity to make them incredibly fit, and without changing anything in their routine or their work or how they approached it, simply all they shifted was their mindset. They they lowered their blood pressure, put on more muscle, you know, it had these real profound effects within their body simply because it was just a mindset shift of how they approach it. So I can absolutely see how that would have huge implications for birth too.
And it's a bit like positive affirmations, which I suppose you know, we talk about in hypnobirthing as well, but you can actually reframe your mindset. So you might be someone who spent a long time being terrified about birth. You start using these positive affirmations, and at first it feels a little bit weird, either reading these positive statements to yourself or perhaps playing them like on an audio track. But you could just play like an audio track with those affirmations in the background if you're going around your day-to-day tasks, and you are just absorbing those positive messages. And again, there are lots of evidence and studies that show how effective the regular use of positive affirmations is on actually reframing how you feel about things. So again, it has a profound impact on your actual body.
Which is so cool.
Yeah, the connections between the mind and body are insane.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. And so one of the other things about hypnobirthing is exposing yourself to really positive birth stories, of which there are many, many, many. You know, it's not a hard thing to find, but I think if you're at the start of your journey, you probably think, well, I haven't heard any of those. Why is it so important, again, to expose ourselves to those real positive stories?
So I think it really goes back to kind of the start and understanding how your body works in labour. So just kind of in a kind of quick overview of what I teach.
This blew my mind. I had no idea.
So the hormone you need to fuel your labour is called oxytocin. And if you are getting induced, the drug you are given is syntocinon, which is synthetic oxytocin. So whether you start your labour spontaneously or you're induced, you need this oxytocin hormone or the synthetic version. Now, oxytocin will make your uterus contract. So it makes those surges happen. It helps your cervix to dilate and then for your baby to be born. So it kind of fuels those uterus muscles. And oxytocin is also your feel-good hormone. So it's the hormone you release when you are cuddling up someone you love, when you're having a laugh with your friends, when you're having sex, and when you're having an orgasm. So that's your feel-good hormone. And when you think about that, that's the hormone that fuels labour. That's immediately mind-blowing, because we're told how like terrible this is going to be and how we just have to get through it, it doesn't quite make sense then, because it's fueled by the thing that makes us feel good. So first of all, there's that little nugget of information. And then the second thing is there's another hormone called adrenaline. So you don't typically produce both at the same time, because adrenaline is the hormone you produce when you're panicked and frightened and anxious. And oxytocin is your feel-good hormone. So you don't tend to feel good and also terrified at the same time. So it's a kind of either or. And so if you produce adrenaline, which you may well do if you're very scared about birth and you go into labor and you're starting to panic, your heart rate immediately increases. It starts pumping your blood to your arms and legs. And that's why it's called fight or flight mode. So your kind of body enters fight or flight. The blood goes to your arms and legs. The reason being is that your oxygen is carried in your blood. So the oxygen is taken to the muscles of the arms and the legs. So they're extra strong. So you can fight or you can take flight and run. And in life-threatening situations, that's the body's way of saving itself. And it can be massively effective. You know, you hear stories about people being able to lift cars off, you know, relatives to free them, things that they wouldn't be able to do in real life because they're so full of adrenaline. They have this kind of superhuman strength. So it can be amazing. But obviously, when it comes to birthing a baby, you do not need strong arms and legs. That is not going to get the baby out. And actually, what it also does is your body doesn't produce extra blood. It just takes the blood from other areas of the body where it thinks it's not needed. So your uterus is a prime example. Your uterus, your digestive system, those things aren't going to save your life. So your body will just happily take the blood away and redirect it to your arms and legs. The consequence of that, if you're in labor, is that you have reduced blood flow going to your uterus, which means you have reduced oxygen going to your uterus, which means your muscles that are trying to work really hard now don't have enough oxygen or a good blood supply. And your baby that's growing in your uterus also has reduced oxygen and blood. So the consequence of that is then labor slows down. It becomes more painful. So you're probably panicking more. So you get into that horrible cycle where you're panicking, it's painful, you're producing adrenaline, it's getting more painful. And then you're being told you're not making progress and your baby's showing signs of distress. So, and that is actually the most common reason for intervention, is your baby showing signs of distress and you not seemingly progressing enough. And it can all kind of be traced back to you producing adrenaline rather than oxytocin. So once you understand this, you're like, right, what can I do to prevent my body producing adrenaline and get that oxytocin flowing? And that's when we use the Hypnobirthing toolkit, which are various different methods, like a breathing technique, which I can demonstrate later, but again, really effective to slow your heart rate down. Guided meditations, which are like mindfulness practice, light touch massage, all of these techniques that you have, you don't need to buy anything for them. They're just, like you said, things within your body. And of course, also all of that work you've done in pregnancy, the positive affirmations, the positive mindset, going back to your original question, the birth stories. If you're calm in your mind, you're calm in your body. If you're panicking in your mind, you're going to be producing the adrenaline and it's going to be having that kind of knock-on effect. So a lot of it is understanding the science of how your body actually labors, and then what can I do to help it do its process rather than hinder it. And so reading positive stories and protecting yourself from scary stories, you know, avoiding Bridget Jones' Diary 3 or whichever one it is where she gives birth. Protecting yourself.
Oh, Bridget, she's been screwing us over for too long now.
Or the writer has. I would love to see that scene redone with the hypnobirthing teacher on the writing team.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, that will help you to feel more confident and more informed as well. Because when I say positive stories, I don't just mean stories of people having straightforward births, having their dream birth and there not being any complications. If you go onto the website, for example, and you read the positive birth stories on there on the Positive Birth Company, there's all types of births. You know, you can filter by induction, cesarean birth, unplanned cesarean, car births, people who've given birth in the car on the way to the hospital, a whole variety of birth stories, but they're shared in a way that's positive and empowering and informative and not set out to leave you feeling terrified.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So if you read those stories, you will feel more confident. And if you feel more confident in your mind, you're going to feel more confident in your body. You're going to be better able to relax using those tools. And then if the conditions are right and your uterus is having all that lovely blood and oxygen, it's working effectively, labour will typically progress in a straightforward way, and you'll feel more comfortable, more in control, and your baby will be happy. So it's win-win.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so interesting, like just listening to you talk there, it's a real mindset shift, isn't it? Is like you're in control. There's heaps of things that you can be doing to make a real difference to this. Whereas I think if you go into it with the mindset that I had initially in my pregnancy, at the beginning of my pregnancy, it's like, okay, how can I endure this and get through the things that are going to be done to me, rather than being the person who's in control and making good decisions and understands what's going on in your body. Because I think unless I had read your book and understood like what was actually happening in my body, and the fact I didn't even know that the uterus was two muscles, right?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
I didn't know either.
No, I had no idea.
Why did I not know this?
Yeah, that the uterus was two muscles, and the way, when you read Siobhan's book, this will become really obvious, but the way in which those muscles interact together when you're having a surge, and it's like, okay, I can, then when you're feeling the sensations from that surge, I think if you know what's going on, then you're so much less likely to panic. Like you understand the phases of labor and when you get into transition and all those different things. And you can really empower yourself, your birth partner, the people around you. It's huge. And also it backs up your decisions. Like for me, when I was first going into this, I was thinking, I want, birth suite, I want to be in the hospital. And so then I wasn't 100% sure when I made the decision to go into the birth center. But then after reading your book and learning a bit more about hypnobirthing and the things that genuinely make a difference to birth, I felt really confident in the decisions that I'd made and what had led me to the path that I was taking. So that as well is a massively big deal, I think. You mentioned there some of the breathing techniques that we can use in terms of hypnobirthing. There's two main techniques that you talk about in the book, up breathing and down breathing. Can you just quickly give me an idea of what they are? Because I think people would be surprised by how simple and effective they are.
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, breathing is an absolute game changer. Yeah. I say this to everyone, and you've always got it with you. Doesn't cost anything. You don't need to remember to pack anything. It's just the easiest thing to tap into and use. It's like your own superpower that you didn't realize you had. So up breathing is for the up stage of labor. So that's when your uterus muscles are contracting and drawing up and your cervix is dilating. And then down breathing is for the down stage of labor. And that's when your uterus muscles are moving downwards and pushing your baby out. So for the majority of people, the up stage of labor will be the significantly longer stage of labor, where your body starts kind of from early labor, gentle surges, getting stronger, getting more frequent, all the way through to when you're 10 centimeters dilated. That can be several hours. Whereas the down stage of labor, where your uterus muscles push your baby down and out, that can be anything from a few minutes through to kind of a maximum of 2 hours. If you've been pushing for 2 hours, you'll usually be offered some kind of assistance, and you probably will want some help by that point. You'll be tired. You'll be tired. It's hard going labour. They call it labour for a reason. Like it's you're working out, your body's working out. But, so the up breathing is kind of the key one to get to grips with, but it's really easy. You breathe in through your nose for a count of approximately 4. And so as you do that, you take a nice deep inhale through your nose, and you really want your kind of chest to expand. You're filling your lungs with air, and then you exhale slowly through your mouth for approximately 8. And it's just a slow, gentle exhale, like you're kind of letting the air out of a balloon. And as you do that, just kind of consciously allow everything to soften and relax in your body. So your shoulders to fall to their natural level, everything to go limp, kind of release all the tension. Then you breathe in again through your nose for 4, feeling everything expand, out through your mouth for 8, let everything release. Do that 4 times. That is 48 seconds approximately, which is also how long a surge lasts for when you're in established labour. So when your surges first start, they may just be for a few seconds, and you might have a 20-minute break before you feel another one, more like flickers. And they'll start to grow in kind of frequency, duration and intensity. And by the time you're in established labour, which is approximately 3 centimeters dilated, although none of this is an exact science. If you've read the book, you'll know. When you're in established labour, they'll be coming kind of 3 surges every 10 minutes approximately. It'll be in like a nice rhythm, each one lasting about 45 seconds to a minute. And so if you do 4 cycles of that breath, the surge will be over. And I always think you can tell yourself you can do anything for 60 seconds. Mm-hmm. So you breathe in for 4, out for 8. It's getting stronger. In for 4, out for 8. Okay, it's really quite strong. In for 4, it's probably peaking. Out for 8, it's already easing off. In for 4, getting easier. Out for 8, it will either pass completely or it will just be tailing off. And then you're like, right, done. Another one in the bag. I'm one step closer. Every surge is bringing you one step closer to meeting your baby. And then in between, you get that little rest break, which is a perfect time to kind of refuel, have a snack, have a drink, stay hydrated, treat it like you're doing a workout, give your muscles what they need, pep talk with your partner, maybe little words of encouragement, change position to find a more comfortable one. And then you'll feel another surge come on. And again, it will start very gently, building to that peak. And you just pick up that breathing again. In for 4, out for 8, 4 times over. It's that simple, but it is so effective. And you can get perhaps your birth partner to count for you. Or if you've done the practice in pregnancy, you might just kind of get used to the rhythm of what it feels like to fill and expand and then exhale and release. Or you can use the Freya app, which is our virtual birth partner app, which will actually do the counting for you and keep track of how often they're coming. So that's really
and tell you
useful.
Nice things while you're doing it.
And tell you nice things while you're doing it, exactly. Everything you want, the dream birth partner, basically, in a phone. Just can't make your cup of tea, which is the only downside. As soon as that technology becomes available, I'll be on it. But yes, there's different ways you can kind of do it, but that breathing will ensure you're bringing oxygen into your body, and your baby needs the oxygen, but so does your body. It needs the oxygen, the muscles. It will ensure your heart rate is staying calm and steady. And there's loads of, clinical evidence that this is effective. Mm-hmm. Your heart rate will stay calm and steady, and you won't produce adrenaline because you won't be getting into that panic state. And actually, even if you do produce a bit of adrenaline, this is a good way to get yourself back into that calm state of relaxation using this breathing technique. And if nothing else, it gives you something to focus on. So instead of getting caught up in the sensation of the surge and panicking about it, it gives you something to focus on, and you won't believe it. You'll reach that last exhale and you'll be like, oh, it's done already.
Yeah.
So yeah, really amazing. In for 4, out for 8. And you can always tweak it if you find it difficult to inhale for 4 and exhale for 8, because babies, they take up a lot of space and they sometimes reduce your capacity to inhale and exhale. You can just tweak it to 3 and 6. You can also change that on the Freya app if you're using it in settings. So you can make it so that it's comfortable for you. But you just want to make sure the exhale is longer than your inhale, because if your exhale becomes shorter and shorter, you kind of enter that hyperventilating panic breathing. So you really want to make sure you're doing a nice, long, slow exhale. And then when it comes to down breathing, it's just a slight tweak on that, really. I think a lot of people worry, like, how will I know when to change? And what happens if I don't change my breathing? And I don't want anyone to fret about that, because one, you'll know, because your body will start to push and you'll feel like you're going to poo yourself, and then it will become more intense. Like, you can't miss it. So you'll know. And 2, it kind of happens naturally because you've been breathing for so long in sync with your body that as your body starts to push, you kind of naturally change that breath work anyway.
Yeah, right.
So if you tried to do a nice slow inhale for 4 whilst your body was pushing with all its force, you're going to really kind of struggle to do that.
Yeah.
So you just take a quick deep inhale, no counting, just a quick deep inhale, and then you breathe out. And as you breathe out, you're allowing everything to soften, release, and open. And you will feel that it'll be like, oh, like this really deep push. And instead of kind of holding your breath and bracing, because if you kind of engage your pelvic floor and pull everything up, your uterus muscles are trying to push your baby down and out, and you're kind of fighting against it and pulling everything up. So you're really hindering that. So you want to allow everything to soften, release, and open. So you want to do that nice exhale and just allow everything to soften, open, and relax. And your body will be making that push. And then that surge will come to an end. Again, you have that little bit of recovery time, and then you feel it again. quick inhale, and then and you'll be making mooing noises, probably like ooh. When you hear someone make that noise, you're like, we're getting close. It's a noise you don't typically make in life. And when you start that mooing sound, it's your body kind of pushing. And the body's amazing. Those uterus muscles will literally push your baby down and then release. And then you'll have another one, push and release. And so what's happening is your baby's head is just kind of kneading open, the cervix, bobbing back up again, stretching that little bit further, coming back up again. And that means a really gentle birth for your baby, but also less chance of injury for yourself. So you're kind of just working in the rhythm with your body to birth your baby, rather than what you see on telly, which is the legs up in the air, like push, like really stressful situation, push. And the poor person's on their back panting and pushing, and you're just going to cause yourself an injury. So yeah, nice.
So interesting.
Use your breath. Work with your body.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that kind of blew my mind when I was reading the book, is that really you don't have to push yourself. It shouldn't be like a conscious thing where you're trying to push. Your body will do that for you. Just don't fight against it, right?
Absolutely. So if your uterus muscles aren't starting to push down, you're not going to be capable of pushing your baby out.
No.
So you need your uterus muscle to be pushing. So you can only really enter that stage when your body's ready, and then your body's going to be doing it for you. So the most helpful thing you can do is actually try to kind of relax and allow everything to be soft so that your body can push your baby out. And when I used to teach classes like face to face, I remember always saying, really, mums that are sat in the class, like the only thing you really need to learn is how to relax. And actually birth partners, there's like a whole list of things that you can learn. But the main thing you can do, if you're the one that's going to be birthing the baby, just learn how to relax so that everything is soft and your body's going to do what it needs to do. An important bit. But also, obviously, as well as that, being aware that sometimes, despite all of the relaxation, things may not pan out as you hoped, because babies can be in odd positions or different things can happen. And so kind of being open-minded that if something is becoming more complex and interventions being offered, that actually you can stay calm. You can use that breathing technique to stay calm and grounded. Use this decision-making framework, your brain, to ask the right questions. And remember that it is your body and your birth, and to try and make those decisions. And that's so important, because if you're changing pathway, if you're making that decision and you feel like you're making it, you'll be much more happier mentally to embrace that new pathway, because you'll feel, this is the right journey for me and my baby. Whereas if you feel like suddenly these decisions were made for you, you felt out of control, you'll feel a lot less happy typically, and maybe even confused about why things happened the way they did. And a lot of actually the benefit of hypnobirthing is not even just for the birth itself, it's for the postnatal period. You hear about people who suffer trauma, or, even myself with my first birth, I suffered really badly with postnatal anxiety, which I believe was a direct consequence of that kind of acute panic and fear that I had in the experience. And all of the kind of studies about trauma after birth, a very common theme is people feeling out of control in the experience. Panicked and out of control leads them to feel traumatized afterwards. So if you can find a way to navigate your birth experience, staying calm and grounded and in control, even if you're having to make decisions and give birth in a different way, but you're informed and empowered and that's the right choice for you, chances are you're going to feel happier on the other side as well. And that benefit then is lifelong.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's life-changing. You touched on it there, but what's our decision-making framework? Because this is so useful for every decision-making. Yeah, not just in life and not just in birth, right? In life, it's so helpful.
Yeah, like all the time.
Yeah.
So use your brain, or I've heard other people say Brian, ask Brian. So I guess whichever one you want to remember.
Yeah.
It's benefits. So it's an acronym. So B is for benefits, R is for risks. So that's your pros and your cons, essentially. So if intervention's being offered, firstly, there needs to be a clear medical reason for why the intervention's being offered. So, okay, that's the benefit. What are the risks? And often there are associated risks. And so you want to weigh those up. Now, sometimes the benefits will far outweigh the risks and it will be a really obvious decision. And other times it's kind of less obvious. So then you might want to ask, what are the alternatives? So that's the A in brain. What are the alternatives? And again, often there are alternatives, and you don't want somebody else making the assumption that you wouldn't be interested in those alternatives. So for example, if you're offered induction, an alternative might be increased monitoring. So you might want to go into the hospital every day and be strapped up to the machine and check your baby's heart rate and make sure your baby is well. Or it might be an additional scan to check that your baby's growing well. So actually that might be more preferable to you than being induced, for example. So you want to know, what are all of the alternatives? What are all my options? Then I is for instinct or intuition. Your own instinct about what feels right and what feels normal for you and what doesn't is so powerful. And I always say to people, you are the only person that knows what it feels like. You might be surrounded by doctors who have done this their whole working lives, but you are the only person in the room that actually knows what it feels like, because the baby is in you. And you know what is your normal and what is not normal for you. So really listen to your instinct and let that guide you. And if something doesn't feel right, then, push that, because that's what your instinct is telling you. And that's really, really important. And then finally, N is for nothing. What happens if we do nothing? And that time frame can vary. What happens if we do nothing and we come back tomorrow? What happens if we come back next week? If it's more of an urgent decision, what happens if we do nothing for 10 minutes? Can we have a quick chat to make a decision? And in almost all cases, you have some amount of time, even if it's just a small amount of time, to just kind of process that new information that you've had and discuss with your partner, okay, there's the benefits, there's the risks, these are the alternatives. How do I feel about these things? What do you think would be the best course of action? And to make that informed choice without feeling kind of shoehorned down a certain path.
Absolutely.
Huge
so helpful.
benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. And not feeling like you're on that conveyor belt, right? And not feeling like you're on that train of medical interventions that just happens one after one after one. And then looking back and thinking, oh, holy crap. Because this is like it's a life defining experience. And if you look back and you feel like you've not had the experience that you want, or that you had an experience that you could have had more control over, but you didn't, like, those feelings are quite hard to deal with after the fact.
Yeah, and you don't get a rerun. You don't get to do it again. You might be lucky enough to have another baby, but you don't tend to have many of those experiences, and you can't redo them, or you don't get rehearsal. So they're kind of big moments in your life, and you'll remember your birth forever. And I think being able to think back to, one of my son's births, I was talking about the one that was particularly life-changing, because it was when I first found out about hypnobirthing. That changed my whole life. And whenever I thought back to that moment, I felt such strength. Whereas with my first son's birth, it was really the opposite. Anytime I thought about my birth, it felt very terrifying, reminded me how out of control I was, and left me feeling very incapable and like I couldn't trust my own judgment, or body just felt very out of my depth, which was very frightening when you've got a new baby. So, I now think the biggest benefit of it was how it's left me feeling afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that's so wonderful about hypnobirthing is the fact that it actually gives your partner, your birth partner, or whoever's in the room, some real clear instructions on what's actually going to help. Because I think it's, incredibly stressful for them to see you in this position, particularly if they've not seen you in this, intense focused state before. Then if they have an actual guidebook of things that are going to help you produce the oxytocin, keep you calm, make you feel loved, make you feel like you're in a safe place, then it's massively helpful for everyone.
Yeah, so many, I've had such positive feedback from birth partners, because typically they want to help.
Yeah.
They've signed up for the role of birth partner, they want to help, and they might not know what to do, and then they might feel completely out of their depth and scared, especially if there's kind of things that are being talked about that they don't really understand, and it feels quite rushed and quite frightened. They can be feeling really panicked. So actually being kind of clued up what these things are, being part of the creation of the birth preferences, so knowing what your preferences are and what you want to happen in different scenarios, then they can advocate for you confidently. That's really important. being able to coach you with the breathing, the in for 4, out for 8, kind of being aware of language. So being helpful and not kind of saying things that might actually make you feel more frightened. Yeah, I think, and yourself, knowing that the person who's with you on your side is not just there by your side, but they're on your side, they're advocating for you, they understand you, kind of got this shared vision. They have the power to really make things a load better.
Yeah, absolutely. If we only take one thing from our conversation, Siobhan, around birth and hypnobirthing, what's the one thing you want people to take away from it?
Oh gosh, one thing, like a practical
you can have two
tool.
if you need it.
I think if
anything that you think is like, if I knew that things would have been real different.
The breathing. So like my top practical tool would be the breathing. I think I couldn't imagine now trying to labour without the breathing technique. And also because it's so helpful in life.
Yeah.
It's so effective if you're struggling to sleep, or if you're feeling nervous because you've got an interview or you're public speaking or whatever it is, or the kids are driving you mental. It's such a great one. It's so quick, it's so effective. If you close your eyes, just zone out what's going on around you, and you breathe in for 4, out for 8, and you repeat that 4 times, you will instantly feel a sense of calm. Like, it's so effective. And in labour, like I said, it's ensuring you're bringing oxygen into your body. It's preventing you from getting into that fight or flight mode and producing adrenaline. It's keeping you relaxed and producing oxytocin. It's keeping you relaxed so you're clear-headed and can make decisions. It's giving you something to focus on. Yeah, that is probably the top tip from the whole hypnobirthing syllabus. But I think more generally, I just wouldn't want people to dismiss it, to give it a go, because there can be a lot of misconceptions around what it is. But as soon as you actually either read a book or do the course or whatever method, the Freya app, for example, as soon as you understand the science, I think even the most skeptical people can be on board.
Oh, yeah. It's an absolute game changer. Thank you so much, Siobhan. I really appreciate you sparing me the time. It's been such a joy to chat.
Thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast. And I cannot wait to hear your happy news.
I know, how exciting. Siobhan Miller is the founder of the Positive Birth Company and the author of Hypnobirthing, Practical Ways to Make Your Birth Better. I'll put a link in the show notes to the book and where you can find Siobhan and more of her work. And I'll also put a link in the show notes to those podcasts that I mentioned, so you can check those out, because I really think that would be super helpful if you are feeling a bit daunted and you are a bit nervous on how to approach this, as I would. Hopefully, even after that little conversation, you feel a bit more empowered and like you've absolutely got options, and this is not going to be something that you just have to endure. It can be an incredible life-changing experience that you can really take control of and enjoy, and set you up for a brilliant birth. So make sure you check it out. As I mentioned, if you do know someone who's pregnant, or you have a friend who's just recently been through a birth, or that kind of thing, make sure you send them this conversation and get the word out about hypnobirthing, that you don't have to have a man with a cape at your birth. It's actually going to be life-changing, because I really think that I'm so grateful to Jenna, who recommended me the book and put me on to Siobhan's work. So make sure you do the same for someone else, because I promise you they are going to be so grateful to you. I'm Ed Starr. I sincerely hope that's helpful.